Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome along to the very last Landlord Lens of 2021. Throughout this year, myself and NRLA CEO Ben Beadle have been running these webinars where we've been tracking the trending topics for landlords. And we're going to end the year on a kind of high, because I've been through all the trending topics on Property Tribes over the past year. And I have come up with a little countdown of 5 of the main topics that have engaged landlords throughout the past 12 months. So Ben, we've got a great webinar lined up for everybody, haven't we? And you yourself, as CEO of the NRLA, you've actually had quite a few trending topics yourself this year as well, things that you're kind of constantly dealing with.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Vanessa, and good afternoon, folks. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, as you'd expect, landlords have got a lot of concerns, and what affects me affects a huge amount of our members. So in the latter half of this year, we've seen a lot of contact with regards to energy and how that might pan out. We're expecting an announcement. Well, we were expecting it before Christmas, and dare I say it, I think that's going to be a New Year announcement now, but essentially with regards to the EPC ratings and a direction of travel of being a C. Now, we don't expect that to change, but we did hear over the weekend that that 2025 date would shift to 2026, we believe it's going to be, and then existing tenancies by 2028. Yeah, a lot of landlords concerned about that, and as I probably said on this webinar, Vanessa, all of my properties are a D, so my pain is very much the pain of others, and vice versa. So we're working really hard to see what sort of support's going to be out there for landlords, because as you well know, the private rented sector contains some of the most difficult and hard to change properties, or hard to improve properties. And I think we need to keep that cap low. We need the timings to be as generous as they can be. Otherwise, I suspect some landlords may well think in certain cases that there are properties that are simply not worth the time and the hassle. And frankly, the government doesn't have the luxury of landlords falling into that bracket. We have a desperate shortage of housing. So that's the first topic for us. And the second significant topic, really, if I take COVID out of the situation and all of the the ramifications that COVID has, is the reform that's on the horizon. And we've spoken about this at length on this webinar. It's something that concerns a lot of people. And what I want to get across to people that are listening is that the NRLA are taking a lead in this area around what reform should look like, how redress might work, what Section 21 replacement might look like, other initiatives like conciliation being embedded at the heart of any reform. And I'm hosting a Conservative roundtable actually for MPs and peers tomorrow morning, reinforcing those points. So yeah, plenty of work going on, and those really are the two principal concerns. But I think as far as any regulation is concerned, landlords are well used to regulation coming down the track, and I have every confidence that, irritating though it may be, that landlords with the NRLA's help will be able to cope with the challenges in front of them.
Well, I'm sure that those are going to be trending topics well into 2022 as well. So still lots to come on both of those topics. We're going to move to our trending topics of the year now, Ben. And one of the very common things that we find on Property Tribes is newbies coming onto the forum, and they have a certain amount of cash sitting in their bank accounts, and they ask how they're going to invest it. And we get everything from somebody saying, I've got 20k cash to get started in buy to let, right through to I've got 500k, a million, 2 million is the highest number I've seen of a Property Tribes member. And it's really interesting to have these discussions, because obviously somebody starting out with 20k cash is going to have far less possibilities than somebody with, you know, £2 million worth of cash. And it's very interesting to see how the community come together and come up with ways of how to kind of optimize this cash. But clearly, I'm sure you'll agree with me, Ben, we all know that property is a cash, you know, very cash hungry business.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, you need to have deep pockets and know what you're going into, frankly. And I think for me, it's less about kind of what you got up front and what you want to achieve from it, and knowing what you're going into. Because, you know, if the past few years have taught us anything, Vanessa, it's not for the faint-hearted.
Mm.
And that doesn't matter how much money you've got. I think, as you know, as an investor as I am, you want to make sure that you invest in different markets and you know, different opportunities, and spread your risk. So you know, it also depends on your circumstances, as I often bang on about. You know, if you are investing into property, you really need to do your homework when it comes to tax and those types of things, because the fact of the matter is that it may well look attractive at a headline level in terms of investment versus return and so forth. But when that nasty tax man has taken a significant chunk out of it, actually, it may well be costing you more to invest than you first realize. And I think that is something that obviously Section 24 has cast a very gloomy outlook upon, because, you know, the past 4 years have seen a gentle chiseling away of the breaks that existed. And I think if you are a newbie investor, and actually we are seeing, you know, quite a few newbies joining the NRLA, you do need to know what it means in terms of pounds and pence, because, as I say, it can look very attractive on the face of it, but you don't want to be bitten in 18 months time when you come to do your first return. You need to understand what allowances are available to you and so forth, and that will dictate, frankly, you know, how realistic your proposals and appetite to invest are, whether you got 20k or whether you got 2 million quid.
Well, it's just interesting that you obviously mentioned Section 24 there, and that is actually one of the topics we're going to come on to. That one's actually at number 2 on my list of trending topics for 2021. But you mentioned about yields and so on, and we've got a trending topic on Property Tribes today, actually, where somebody is saying that because of Section 24, for higher tax rate landlords, actually capital growth is the only game in town. And that sparked a really interesting discussion, because, you know, you and I will always advocate that you must always have net cash flow, you know, month on month, if you want to survive long term in order to benefit from capital growth. But it seems that, you know, the kind of landscape is changing a little bit, and people are thinking, you know, the margins are so slim now, I've just got to hang in there long term for capital growth and just hope that, you know, my rent will cover my mortgage and my tax liability. And that's a kind of dangerous position to be in unless you have very significant other income.
I think that's right, Vanessa. That's not a position I'd like to find myself in, to be honest with you, because you're taking a huge gamble on already inflated markets in some areas continuing to go up. Now, I know that we all advocate property as an investment, but I would want to know that as a self-sustaining business, that my net monthly cash flow is going to cover all of my expenses and a little bit more. You know, if it can grow at a reasonable rate in terms of capital appreciation at the same time, then that's super duper. But I would, for me, I would want both to work. Otherwise I wouldn't do it.
I think so. And also we all know that capital growth is entirely speculative. It's not guaranteed. You can't spend it until in hindsight. But obviously
Monopoly money.
True, but obviously with month on month cash flow, it is actual net cash in the bank, and you can spend it. And, you know, if you have good net month on month cash flow, then you can stay in the game long enough to benefit from capital growth. But I think it just highlights again the impact that Section 24 is having on kind of landlord attitudes, and we're coming on to that in a minute. At number 4, Ben, very trending topic of the year. people talking about the worst financial decision they've ever made in property. And some of these, somebody has put, buying off plan in Florida. Somebody else has said accepting a tenant who started a cannabis factory. Quite a few people said getting married, which I thought was quite strange.
I don't blame you.
And a lot of people said about, not realizing that their own home could have been their first buy-to-let. They could have changed it to a buy-to-let mortgage, released equity, paid off their residential mortgage, and used the difference to buy another residence. And that's actually how I got started fully in property in 2004. And I think what's so interesting about hearing about other people's mistakes is that you can use their hindsight as your foresight. So it can help people kind of stop falling into the pitfalls. So have you any views, Ben, on kind of the worst financial mistake that you made?
I have to say, Vanessa, I'm kind of quite happy with my portfolio. If I was to be critical, it would probably be, so I fix all of my mortgages, and I fix them over 3 to 5 years. And I've always done that because personally, I value the security of knowing that, I've been a total idiot, obviously, in the light of, mortgage rates being as they are. But I valued that security over everything else, which is, if everything goes Pete Tong, I know what my rent's going to be. I know that I'm not going to have that element going up, and it's going to be self-sufficient and a little bit more. And the reason I've done that is when I first invested in property, my dad was very, very old school and reminding me of, interest rates of 15, 16, 17%. Obviously, times have changed somewhat, but I always took a cautious approach. And I guess if I was to look back, so some of those fixes have worked very, very well. There's a couple of fixes that, are massively out of kilter now, not massively, but, 3% rather than, maybe 1.5% for sort of three-year mortgages. So I guess I could look back at that, but predicting interest rates is a mug's game, frankly. Who would have thought they'd be where they are at the moment? But if I was to look back, that's probably cost me more than anything else, I would suggest. That said, I've still got all of my places. They're all rented. The rents are decent and have gone in the right sort of direction for me, as have capital appreciation. So you can't win them all, is, I guess, the moral of that story.
Well, indeed, but also, Ben, I think there's a lot to be said for peace of mind. I think it's one of the most valuable things that we can have as property investors, because I got into property to be able to sleep at night, not to be, lying awake staring at the ceiling, worrying. And I fixed a lot of my buy-to-let mortgages 2 or 3 years ago for 5 years, and actually I'm really pleased that I have. I think we do have to, think about our own risk threshold. The great thing about property is, though, Ben, that you can actually, work with it to your own risk threshold. So you can be very low risk like myself, or you can be kind of higher risk. You can have whatever you want to determine your own threshold of risk. So I think, probably the worst financial mistake I've made was not understanding the difference between freehold and leasehold. And I bought a lot of 1 and 2 bed apartments when I started out, and then I had this huge penny drop that service charges really do eat into your cash flow, and you get your bill on the 1st of January for your service charge. And in one case, I remember one year, I think mine was about 18,000 total across all my flats.
Oh, wow.
So that came as a bit of a shock. And I'm now a big advocate of freehold houses. But I do obviously understand and respect people's decisions to buy flats. They certainly can work. I think they work well in big city centres like London, Manchester, etc., Liverpool, Birmingham, where there's very high demand of people in the area, and they're entry level for people that are renting, aren't they? They're always going to be probably the least expensive option to rent, so there's always going to be demand for them.
No, exactly right, Vanessa. But I think where, and sorry to disappear, but I realized I was sat in the dark. The night has fallen, so I've just put the light on. But in terms of that leasehold point, I think it'll be interesting to see what people are thinking at the moment in light of the cladding, because I think that there's some absolutely diabolical stories, and I see we've got a question on the Q&A about cladding. As far as I'm aware, that's at the top of Michael Gove's in trade to deal with building safety and cladding, because I do think that a failure to deal with it is going to leave people in very, very significant hardship for no fault of their own, but B, really make people think about their choices around where they move or invest. And I don't think that would be a consequence that the government wants to wrestle with.
No, I totally agree. Talking of the Q&A, we should just point out, if you've got any questions, any comments about what we've been discussing, please drop them in the Q&A box. That's where we're going to be hosting the questions, which we'll be coming to at the end of this webinar. So Q&A box, if you have any questions or comments about what we've been discussing throughout the webinar. Let's move on to our trending topic number 3 as we count down. And this one I've called My Tenant ... And this is, we get landlords coming on to Property Tribe saying things like, my tenant is not ventilating the property and there's damp and mold. My tenant did not clean the property to the same standard as they had it at the start of the tenancy when they left. My tenant is not allowing access for repairs. And a very funny one, my tenant wants me to contact the neighbours and tell them to stop parking their car outside my tenant's house. And Ben, when I see these, I kind of think of the landlord, the NRLA landlord advice line, and those phones ringing. And these are the kind of questions that you get in, day in, day out. And they're really just all about, tenant management, aren't they?
I mean, there's nothing massively complex about them, about those types of questions, other than they're part of your day-to-day life as being a landlord. So, if you're living in a property and someone parks across your drive, what do? You go out the front, you tell them to bloody move it. That's not the landlord's responsibility. That's, I would have thought, the tenant's responsibility to sort out. If I was to answer that question, I'd probably say, so I have a massive issue with keys, Vanessa. I've got, as you know, student properties, and there's always somebody that locks themselves out. And it's, as I've said on this webinar, it is systematically at 7 o'clock on a Saturday evening, just as I sit down with a very large glass of wine to watch my favourite programme of the week of Strictly Come Dancing. And that is the thing that really irritates me about student management is the keys. And I will do something this summer. I don't know what I'm going to do, digilocks or whatever, but I need to improve that. But for me, it's all about the keys.
Digital access, Ben, that's what you need.
I need to modernise.
Access ports where they can open the lock by a code sent to their phone. That's what you need.
Right, good. I've learned something from this webinar today. Every day is a school day, folks. That's top of my list.
You're so right. Every day is a school day. I mean, I learn something new on Property Tribes every day, and I think it's a sign of a good landlord. If you want to learn all the time and you want to grow as a business person, because we are running businesses, and the more you learn and grow, I think the more you mitigate your risk. And we all know, or certainly I believe, that COVID-19 pandemic and all the economic fallout around it has significantly amplified risks for landlords, and we all need to be playing our absolute best game, don't we, Ben?
We absolutely do. And I think, COVID has really shone a light on those risks, but it's also, dare I say, it's also really shone a light on the strength of the landlord and tenant relationship direct. We see this time and time again around, landlords really bending over backwards, certainly during COVID, to accommodate their tenants and to really view them as customers. And I think we're at pains, and I've made the point to Chris Pincher and Eddie Hughes, and frankly anybody that will listen, we have to just judge the market not through the extremities of or the extremes of the market. We have to look at the good that's going on, and sure, we have to deal with some stuff around the edges, but it's at the edges. Let's be really clear about that.
Yes, I totally agree. I think it was interesting what you said about the landlord not being responsible for dealing with neighbours. I would 100% concur with you on that. I think there's a lot of issues where tenants try and get landlords involved when in fact it's not for the landlord to get involved. They have other routes of redress that tenants should seek, and I would caution landlords very carefully to get involved with tenants if there's things like disputes with neighbours and things like that. There's only certain instances where you as a landlord do need to get involved, and if you get involved in some of these other inappropriate instances, it can actually open a big can of worms for you. So you do need to be careful, and if in doubt, ring the NRLA helpline and or ask on property tribes.
Absolutely. No, and I think you're right, Vanessa, because I think there is a temptation, dare I say it, that people are not naturally confrontational, are we? It's always easier to get somebody else to tell somebody the bad news, but that's not necessarily your role as a landlord or a property owner. I think if it got to the point of really affecting the tenancy, then I think that you would want to step in if you really thought that tenancy was going to be at risk. But I think a lot of it is about tenant management and tenant education. If you were the homeowner, who would you get to do this for you? You do it yourself. It's like the boiler repair. You can't suddenly make it much quicker just because you're a landlord. All of these things, sometimes take a little bit of time. The fact that with a landlord arranging it is neither here nor there. So I think it is about managing your tenants, and you can have a really nice conversation that basically says, do it yourself.
I think also, Ben, I'm a massive advocate of midterm property inspections, and I think if you do conduct midterm property inspections maybe once or twice a year, you can very often nip these kind of problems in the bud, such as a tenant has started hoarding, or a tenant has kept an unauthorized pet, or a tenant is not treating the property very well, not ventilating it, and damp and mold and developing. Or there's repairs that aren't being reported and the property's going downhill. If you have midterm property inspections, you can actually head a lot of these problems off before they erupt, so to speak.
Yes, I think that's right, and you obviously need to balance that with the not doing it too frequently. And I have to say I fall into the latter category, actually, of perhaps not doing it quite as frequently as one should, on the basis that no news is good news. But I do make sure that I go around there mid-tenancy to make sure that things are as they should be. And it also gives me an opportunity to, maybe do some repairs as is necessary, rather than take a big hit at the end of the tenancy when tenants move out.
Yeah, little and often on the repair front.
Indeed,
Definitely.
yeah.
Okay, we'll move on to topic number 2, and that is, basically taxation, and specifically Section 24. It is fully rolled out now. Some landlords have finally woken up to it due to seeing their tax return, and we're hearing today that 76% of local authorities are reporting an increase in landlords selling up or changing their buy-to-lets to holiday lets. And this is really exacerbating the housing crisis. And there's been quite a few articles in the media about landlords turning to holiday lets because they're not subject to Section 24 taxation. And Ben, I can't say we're surprised, are we? We've been predicting this for 5 years, because there's this massive disconnect between local government, who are desperate for landlords, and then central government, who are doing their absolute utmost to deter landlords. And yet, local government's at the coalface. They're trying to, honour their housing obligations, and they do that a lot by discharging them into the private rented sector due to lack of social housing. And now landlords, are really feeling the brunt of Section 24, and they're either leaving or going over to holiday lets. So this problem's, I can only see it's going to get worse.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a great deal of sympathy. I'm surprised that anybody is surprised, quite frankly. And I also think it's pretty lamentable that at a time when we've got a housing crisis, that there is an incentive for short-term rentals that don't hold communities together. People rock up. I mean, I'm guilty of this, by the way, as I said at the ALA conference. It's great to be able to use Airbnb and a furnished holiday let for a stag party or whatever, but that has a knock-on effect on the community, doesn't it? But what government are doing by this stance is they're basically saying to landlords, well, go and do your holiday lets at a time when we desperately need long-term affordable rental accommodation. If you've got less of something, prices go up. So they're not only inflating the rents by a lower supply, they're actually encouraging this sort of activity. And as you know, Vanessa, my view is that this is totally arse about face. It should be the other way around. There's nothing to be ashamed about in terms of allowing landlords to offset their reasonable costs against tax. I just think it's in the wrong place, because what we need more housing, and we need more private rented sector housing. We need more social housing. We need more build to rent housing. We need more of everything. And, there is should absolutely be no shame in looking at the buy to rent market and looking at landlords and recognizing actually they're very agile. They can deliver quite a lot of housing. Now, I appreciate and I understand the reasons why they've cooled it down slightly, but in some respects they're heating it up because we just have a diminishing supply that is having an adverse effect on availability of properties and therefore the cost. So it seems to me that it's illogical to not support the private rented sector, and to really put people off, because at the end of the day, who are the people that lose out? Landlords will go and invest somewhere else. There's no issue about that, but actually it's the renters that will end up paying more and living in substandard accommodation.
Yeah, because I can see, it's obvious that rents are going to become under pressure even more if there's less stock in the marketplace to rent. Very interesting, Ben, because we were in Cornwall in May and we were talking to somebody that had a business where a sort of outdoorsy kind of, experiences business. And he said that he was absolutely fully booked over the summer, but he was having to restrict how much business he could do because he just couldn't find accommodation in the local area for his staff. It was all either too expensive or had been turned over to holiday lets. And he said it was an absolutely enormous problem for businesses in Cornwall to service the hospitality industry because staff could not find affordable accommodation in the county. And I think we're seeing a lot of pushback against second homeowners now. There's talk of in Wales that they're going to be very heavily restricted and so on and so forth. So I think this is probably something we're going to see more of in 2022. Maybe government will put holiday lets under Section 24 to deter landlords going down that road. I mean, who knows? But very often they seem to pull too many big levers without understanding what's the impact is going to be elsewhere in the sector.
I mean, that's exactly right. And if you had asked the reason why government were making these changes, they would have said we want to raise more revenue, but also they actually wanted to improve access, so to cool down the market slightly so that first-time buyers and so forth could have access to properties that were apparently being hoovered up by buy-to-let landlords. But the reality is that this has a totally unintended consequence of diminishing supply, making homes more costly without anything else to replace it. So it's really bonkers. But our audience knows this, and it's something that that we've been saying, you've been saying, other organizations have been saying, and it's what happens when rhetoric leads the debate. Isn't it great that landlords are being taxed? Well, actually, no, it bloody isn't, because at the end of the day, it's the average tenant that suffers. And I know what the next conversation is going to be. The next conversation is going to be, oh, well, rents are a bit high, aren't they? We need to make sure that they don't go any higher, and we need to, like they've suggested in Wales, have a look at rent stabilisation.
Yep, and Scotland as well.
Indeed. I mean, what a load of rubbish. In what other environment do you hold down the true cost of housing? If they were to hold down the true cost of buying a property, there'd be absolute outrage, wouldn't there? What you do is you try and make sure that there's 95% mortgages available and Help to Buy schemes. That's how you get people on the ladder. And actually, we need to, before we start talking about greater regulation of an already over-regulated sector, we need to start seriously thinking about the supply of properties and where it's going to come from. And we need to do that in a debate that isn't toxic, that doesn't pit landlords against tenants, that just has a really sensible conversation about whether it's build-to-rent landlords, whether it's individual property owners, whether it's social housing or housing associations. We need all of the above and more, not just one area.
Well, here, couldn't agree more. And let's hope that Mr. Gove really grasps this and goes forward and thinks about this next year when he's got his feet firmly under that table. Okay, we'll move on to the number one trending topic of the year, and this was around the property wealth creation industry, and specifically a very well-known property guru by the name of Glenn Armstrong went bankrupt for somewhere in the region of I think 6 million. And it's really interesting, Ben, because we don't regard this kind of property education wealth creation sector as actually anything to do with what the world that we live in. But there is some crossover, and these wealth creation gurus do actually give genuine landlords a bad name, because they're always talking about how wealthy they are through property. They're photographed on their Ferrari or their Lamborghini, or they're in front of their massive mansion, and they really sell this dream of get rich quick through property, which we know is not true. And Glenn Armstrong went bankrupt, and we actually had warnings about him on Property Tribes from 2009. So that's 12 years of community generated warnings before he went bankrupt. And I think it just shows what a long time it could take for somebody to, actually be shown to be a charlatan, because this guy certainly was. And interestingly enough, he had his London penthouse repossessed because he hadn't paid the rent for over 2 years, and he was in over £200,000 rent arrears, but he still used that London penthouse for his marketing over those 2 years, even though he wasn't actually paying the rent. So I just wanted to highlight that appearances can be deceptive, can't they, Ben? And people get sucked into this dream of easy riches through property, and they end up being financially worse off.
No, that's right, absolutely. And as we've said time and time again, Vanessa, this sort of, I'm not a big fan of this wealth creation stuff. I think that if I was to be, if I was so fabulously wealthy, I wouldn't be running a wealth creation business. I'd be in the Bahamas, drinking a pina colada under the sun and having people ferry things to me. So I know it looks good, and I read that. I did read that story, and I suspect that particular gentleman probably benefited from the eviction ban as well over that time, which is very irritating. And all I would say, without being drawn too much on the detail, is that this sort of thing does not need to be costly or expensive. If it sounds too good to be true, invariably in my life I've worked out if it is too good to be true, it probably isn't true at all. And I think I would stick close to home when it comes to training and improvement, because there's lots of training that's out there. We do training, but it's a fraction of the price of this sort of wealth creation stuff. And I think I don't think there is a magic recipe, or the Colonel's secret recipe out there that can be bought and learned from. Actually you learn a lot through the forums on property tribes. You learn a lot throughout the experience of others. You learn a lot through property educators such as NRLA, Kate Faulkner, Paul Champlina, people that have been around for a while and are trustworthy, and you're not paying 20, 30, 40, 50 grand to become a millionaire HMO landlord. So that's not for me. I've not been on one of those types of things, and I've no intention of going on one, frankly.
I think there's such a major concern because they're totally unregulated, and if things do go wrong, if you don't get what you were promised, there's very, very few routes of redress, and this is something that I've spoken about recently in an interview with Paul Champlina, which you can find on Property Tribes, where we're trying to promote some form of regulation of these wealth creators. They're all over TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. There was an article actually in the New Statesman recently saying that, describing how these landlord influencers were just, showcasing their wealth at the expense of people, promising them a dream. And it did reflect badly on the, the rest of the landlord community who are not running these really, really expensive training courses. Ben, I do need to ask you something which was raised on Property Tribes. A few eyebrows were raised when it was announced that the NRLA were partnering with Asset Academy. So I was interested to hear why you've decided to do that.
Yeah, very happy to answer that, Vanessa. There's no questions off limits as far as that is concerned. I've been working with Martin Roberts for the last year or so, and a bit. He's appeared frequently in our magazine. Martin is a director at Asset Academy, and I think that we're trying to achieve the same types of things, which is improving the sector. And working together collaboratively. We have a light touch deal in terms of recommending certain training and membership of the NRLA, and it's at very, very early stages. I know there was a concern with a lady on the blog about a legacy company, actually called Legacy, I think they were, that Asset Academy had taken over, and I've spoken with that lady. I forget her name now, Gwen, I think it was. I've spoken with that lady to talk about her concerns, but as far as Asset Academy is concerned, I'm perfectly comfortable with what they stand for and what they're going to be doing, and yes, very happy to talk about it as the partnership progresses. But as I say, it's only just kicked off, and it's simply a recommendation sharing only at this stage, and we'll see where it ends up. But I'm a landlord. I see every as many. Well, I go out my way to see what people think about the NRLA and so forth. So I was disappointed by some of those comments, but I'd like to put people's mind at rest that I don't think there is anything untoward there.
I think what concerns me mostly about the wealth creation industry is that it does tend to attract young people. I see pictures from these events and the people seem to be between 18 and 25 years old. Many have English as a second language. Many are in quite desperate positions and are, if you're really down on your luck, you can just grab onto something and think, oh, this could be the answer, this could be my way out. And I think a lot of people get sucked into these wealth creation courses with promises of easy riches and becoming financially free in a very short space of time. And then, it doesn't work out for them. They're worse off financially. They've got no route of redress and they're traumatized by it. We even hear of people taking their own lives after they've lost huge amounts of money or got into debt through credit cards or extra loans or whatever. So it's something that does need to be highlighted. And I know you feel the same way as me, Ben, on that score.
Absolutely right, Vanessa. You know, I think this is an area of the sector that is well overdue for a clear out, quite frankly. And you know, I think people like Paul and Kate, as I've mentioned, and yourself and here at the NRLA have got a role to play to make sure that really those wealth creators are exposed, I guess, as not being a sound type of investment. It's not something I would do. That said, I'm not totally financially independent, so maybe don't listen to me. But I understand the point that and the concern that exists around that, and it's one of the areas the sector can absolutely do better at, and do better at. We must.
Well, some of their marketing is so seductive. I almost think actually maybe they have got that secret sauce, that little bit of fairy dust, something I'm missing. But then when I look into it, it's just headlines. There's no substance to it.
And that's the point. Like any type of investment that you make, you do need to look into it. You do need to understand how long the company has been trading, what their last accounts are, and all of those basic types of due diligence that you would do if you were going to part with quite a lot of money. Now, if you're paying 50 quid for a training course, well, you probably won't do that type of due diligence. But alarm bells should be ringing when people were asking for a significant amount of money, because in any type of business, you want a return on that investment, right? You want that back and more. So I do think it's incumbent on us to really point out to people around the types of due diligence they should be looking at, and also looking at what other prior customers have said, because I've seen the various reviews on the organization that you mentioned at the outset with Glenn Armstrong and so forth, and I think there's a significant amount of clues within there as well.
Well, there definitely is, and putting somebody's name or company name into Google is a really sensible thing to do before parting with any money, because as we said, the sector is unregulated, and the only thing protecting consumers at the moment is community self-regulation, where people are speaking out or raising concerns or fact-checking some of these property gurus. And Ben, you've very kindly given me permission to mention what's happening to me as a result of fact-checking a well-known property guru. And I just wanted to thank you for your support of my crowd justice campaign. And we're going to pop the link onto the Q&A chat, because I'd really appreciate it if everybody looking at this webinar could pop along there and maybe show solidarity for me and support for me, because I'm fighting a very, very scary legal battle as a result of fact-checking a well-known property guru. So yeah.
And Vanessa, just to add there, yes, if I can direct those listeners to the chat button, there's a link in there. Just have a look at some of the detail behind the case, and make your own judgment as to whether that's acceptable in any world, but certainly today's world.
Thank you. Yes, the link to my crowd justice campaign is in the chat. And as I said, I really would appreciate it if you could go and have a look and see if you think my legal battle warrants some support. I'm just approaching £16,000 that's been crowdfunded in less than 2 weeks. And I'm extremely grateful to every single person that has made a donation, no matter how big, how small, because it really shows that there's support for me. And I really feel with people like yourself, Ben, and Paul Champlina coming out in support of me. Also, I've had an article in Property Industry I really feel that I've got the backing of the industry, and it just means so much to me. So thank you, everybody. Okay, so that's really the roundup of our kind of top 5 trending topics of 2021. I'd like to invite Maria to join us as the host of the webinar. Maria's been curating the questions that have come in, and we may have sparked some questions as a result of our debate. So let's see what Maria's got.
Yes, hi. We've had quite a few questions come in, so I'm going to kick straight off. We've had a few on the energy improvements. So someone has asked regarding the EPC requirements for a C rating in leasehold property, what is the responsibility of the leaseholder and what is the responsibility of the freeholder, especially regarding the lack of efficiency around the windows?
That's a very good question. I think obviously if you've got a dwelling in there, then the EPC is down to you within that leasehold unit. Do you know what? I don't know the detail of the of the common parts and how that works. So Vanessa, I don't know if you can field that, but otherwise what I will do is I will post something in the follow-up once I've spoken to somebody sensible on our advice line, if that's okay. That's quite a particular question.
Yes, it's a very good question, actually. It has been posed on Property Tribes, and I have asked leasehold expert Bernie Wales if he could look into it and provide an answer to the Property Tribes community, because I think there is a grey area between what you can do within your own unit and how it's impacting the rest of the building. So yes, it's a bit of a curly one, and we'll try and get the answer for everybody.
Great. And another one, again, on energy improvement. So this, I suppose, boils down to the rating system. We have one lady watching today who said that she's wasted money on energy improvements because she's insulated the exterior of one of her properties and it hasn't increased the rating, and she owns another property that's identical without the external insulation, which has the same rating.
Wow. So I don't know who that lady is, but I share the concerns actually about the algorithm, if we call it that, the underlying mechanism for calculating what comes out at the end. And I say that because I've got two flats in the same block. One's a C, one's an E. I mean, they built the same time. They were built 15 years ago. They've got exactly the same fittings, all of that sort of stuff, yet they've come out different just because of timings. And I know we heard a lot about algorithms in the context of student exams over the summer, but I know that the algorithm does change, and it does change to make it more stringent. So I think the question is, how reliable is this EPC system? And I'm not really terribly confident in the underlying values, actually. I think the whole energy debate, I mean, I totally agree that housing needs to play its part in terms of direction of travel, move to net zero and carbon emissions and all of that sort of jazz. That's not in dispute. I just think I'm not so sure the actual EPC system is terribly fit for purpose as being a very solid measure, I'm afraid. I don't think that will change in the short term, but that concern that has been raised is something that we are talking about for sure.
Yeah.
Right. Another one similar, but asking for your advice if you have any. This person has an ex-local leasehold property in the City of London, which has single glazed aluminium windows, and the council has been saying for 6 years the windows will be replaced, and they keep on delaying the project. The property has been fully painted and decorated this year, but there's another delay and it now won't happen till next year. The student tenants are complaining about condensation and mold, which is damaging the property as a result. Do you have any advice for this?
Yeah, I mean, presumably the local authority are the freeholder there and will be doing sort of a Section 20 notice to have. Well, will they actually? Thinking about it, it depends. When I'm backtracking now, but when I've replaced windows in a flat, that's down to me. There's other things that are subject to a Section 20 notice. If I were you, sorry to ramble, but if I were you, I'd make a formal complaint to the local authority to understand what their actual plans are, because any managing agent would have a schedule of work. Over whether it's every 3 years for internal redecoration or external repairs or whatever. So I would be contacting the local authority. What I don't understand, thinking about it, is why the local authority would be replacing the windows. Maybe they would be doing them all as one job lot and recharging back to leaseholders. So probably need to understand a bit more about your situation. ben@nrla.org.uk if you want to drop me a line.
I mean, just a temporary measure, and it might sound a bit naff, but you can buy these very heavy duty winter curtains that have heat reflection on them. So, you know, you could maybe supply some of these more heavy duty curtains over the winter, because they definitely do cut out a lot of the draft and the cold. I know that from experience, because I have a huge open conservatory on the back of my house, and even though it's double glazed, I still have to pull the curtains across the join with the lounge, because it's, you know, it is chilly. So I think there could be just a temporary sort of solution just to keep the tenants warm over the winter.
Can we take one last question, Maria?
Yes. Someone has asked, would you advocate having properties managed or self-managed? And if the latter, how much should you be involved?
So I'll go first on this one and say, so I'm a self-managing landlord, whoever asked that. I mean, personally, the only piece of the jigsaw that I engage an agent for is to find me a tenant, and I hope that NRLA will be able to fix that in the new year to give advertising rights to landlords to be able to advertise their own properties through some fairly major portals. In terms of how much time, you should put a price on your time, actually. I probably don't do that terribly well, but I personally, having me choose my words carefully, I would struggle to let an agent manage my portfolio. I would rather do it myself, even if it ends up costing me more. Read into that what you will.
Oh, I say. Well, I'm a fully managed landlord. I've been working with one agent since when I started building my portfolio in 2004. So they're still with me 18, 19 years later. I regard agents as worth their, well, reputable agents as worth their absolute weight in gold. I regard them as like a partner in my business. They are such a useful source of support, knowledge, helping me, you know, manage and optimize the properties. One thing I would say, though, is that even if you have a fully managed service, it does not divest you of your responsibilities as a landlord. And that's something really, really important to understand, because if something really terrible happens in your property, such as, God forbid, a tenant dies or something like that through carbon monoxide poisoning, then that would end up being your fault. You couldn't say, well, actually the property was fully managed, they didn't organize a boiler inspection or a gas safety certificate. It does actually, you know, the buck stops with the landlord. So this is why it's really, really important to vet a potential letting agent, and I always recommend that people work with agents that have voluntarily you know, adhered to professional standards, and that would be members of trade bodies like NRLA and Safe Agent. Those are the kind of agents that are likely to be far more professional than some of the others that don't, you know, go for these standards.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Vanessa, I think we've reached a natural end.
I think we have.
A lot of questions there. Very good.
Yes. I think you had a little surprise for us, didn't you, Ben?
Oh, I did. Oh, yes. Oh, sorry, I almost forgot. I was just going to put on my beautiful Alice band and say thank you very much to everybody that's joined us today and heard us talk throughout the year. It's so good to be in a forum where we can talk in this way. Really helps me in my work with the NRLA, and thanks very much for listening. So I hope that 2022 is going to be a really, really good one for our listeners, and a very Merry Christmas if Christmas is your bag.
I'd just like to echo that. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on the Landlord Lenses throughout the year. I think we've had some really good debates come out of it. We've created awareness of important issues for landlords. We really appreciate your participation, sending the questions in. It really does give Ben and I a feel of what, you know, the pain points are for landlords. And I too would just like to say, you know, wish everybody watching a very peaceful and happy Christmas. We will be back in 2022 2022, and sure, we're going to have loads more trending topics coming through in the next year, but for now, thank you very much for watching, and it's goodbye from myself and Ben. Happy Christmas.